today. Thanks for having me. My work spans printmaking, papermaking, and textiles. And as Jennifer said, I have a background in drawing and painting, and from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and recently went back to school for printmaking and papermaking and got my MFA from the University of Iowa. And for this talk today, I'll start by introducing some of the concepts, ideas, and personal background that is important to the conceptualization of my ongoing work. And then I'll talk a bit about process and finish with an overview of an ongoing series of mine that's called Meadow Constellations. So I grew up in Minnesota and Wisconsin and have moved around quite a bit and lived in different places in the US that have pretty different climates. And as you'll see in the following slides, color is very important to my work. When I think of color, I think of light, and I think of the color of the sky outside of my old bedroom windows on Monroe Street in Brooklyn. Here's some photos during sunset and sunrise. A chalky but vibrant cool purple comes from the eastern window, and orange and pink to the north, both of which you can see here. The light on a mountaintop in Idlewild, California, where I worked, which is somehow brighter and clearer than the Midwestern states where I grew up. And the fear I felt seeing the lush greens of the high desert landscape flash blaze orange in the reflection of a wildfire that came so close to campus we had to evacuate. I think of the heat that came off the halogen lights in the gallery where I used to work and how they made every color a little bit yellow. The flickering blue LEDs we tried to replace them with, and later the better white LEDs that we did. Color is light and light is color. For as long as I can remember, I've always been particularly moved by the magic of vocal harmonies. Out of what feels like nowhere, when specific harmonies are hit, my throat closes, my eyes tear. And as far as I can tell, it has nothing to do with like the lyrics or the storyline of what I'm hearing, but it's something within the harmony itself, hitting something deep inside and connecting with the nonverbal part of myself that processes deep emotion. Abstraction, like instrumental music, can connect directly to emotion without words or logic or verbal understanding. Although my work often references the external world and representational forms, I understand my work as connection without narrative, connecting through color and through tactility, often without a straightforward logic, creating a feeling or a moment that resists being defined by words. When I was a child, I really loved playing this surrealist style drawing game, scribbling on a piece of paper with my eyes closed and then finding an image within the scribbles. My work over the last 4 years feels a bit like an extension of this game. Staying open. There's an artistic freedom in surrendering to improvisation that makes artistic process feel like a game. Each move leads to the next. Each choice really informs the following, leaving room for surprise throughout the whole making process. There's a sentence in the mission statement for William Pentrich's Center for the Less Good Idea that I deeply resonate with, and it's in the act of playing with an idea, you can recognize those things you didn't know in advance, but knew somewhere inside of you. I understand intuition to be what you know in your body before you know it in your mind, before you can verbalize it. Something that you can feel but can't yet explain. And for me, this way of working really lets the body lead. After interviewing emotion scientist Dr. Keltner on the Unexplainable podcast, Manning Nguyen summarized cultivating awe as paying attention. She stated, awe is the gap between what we know and what we don't. Keltner explains that awe produces wonder and encourages curiosity and finding meaning and coherence in life's mysteries. This interview on the Unexplainable podcast really gave me language to classify the last 10 years of my studio work as a journal of everyday awe. Really collecting moments that make me stop and pay attention, even without perhaps knowing why. Things like watching the leaves change through the same window over the course of a couple weeks, watching light dancing on my bedroom windows coming through the trees next door, finding awe in the studio through color combinations that make each other vibrate or create spatial awareness, learning new processes and their histories, following impulse and gut feeling rather than a plan, staying open to notice, open to play, open to surprise, open to fail, and then try again. Keltner describes awe as an ineffable emotion that is difficult to describe with language, a feeling that resists definition with words. And in my work, I really hope to capture an abstract idea or an undefined feeling or emotion in the abstraction that for a moment might catch someone off guard to experience a small moment of awe. So collage has been a really integral part of my work for some time, and sewing has come in and out of my work since I was a kid. I brought sewing back into my graduate school work as a solution to joining together different handmade papers that had different shrinkage rates. So if you join them when they're wet, it makes it curl in ways that are not always what I wanted. So sewing offered both something that felt very natural to me, but also a way to put them together without getting them wet. And gently held together, stitches allow the different papers to expand and to shrink and take on moisture from the air as papers do and move and cockle over time. This work is titled Coming and Going. It's a sewn collage from two monotypes. One is an oil monotype on Arches 88 paper in the background, and then a trace monotype on fabric from a cotton t-shirt in the foreground, which is machine sewn to the paper. Has anyone ever made a watercolor on paper or soaked paper for printmaking? So you probably know that paper is inherently sculptural unless you take measures to ensure its flatness. And working at a print gallery for over 6 years really taught me that a lot of people in the US print market expect pristine, like hyper flat surfaces. And to many people, wrinkles or creases will lower the value of the work. But in grad school, I was learning how to make paper and learning about the history of paper and the histories and sculptural capabilities that paper has. Histories of folded paper, kneaded paper, even cockled paper. And one of those, for instance, is a Japanese technique called momogami, in which the paper is kneaded and it's crumpled and then smoothed and crumpled and then smoothed many, many times over. And it introduces hundreds or thousands of wrinkles into the paper, which gives the paper stretch and strength, and it also, within that history, it made the paper suitable for wearing as clothing. And thinking about paper in this way led me to think about my two-dimensional work and my print and paper work as sculptural objects. And I started considering collage as quilt and quilt as collage. And the line between those two terms really began to blur for me. Studying the history of paper making my own paper from old bed sheets, making momogami-inspired paper, which you can see here, the green is a momogami-style paper. Those things all made me think about fabric and paper as inherently intertwined. This work is titled Stack, and the green part that you see is a monoprint on handmade momogami-style paper, which I made from kozo, which was grown at the University of Iowa. And it's hand-stitched to a silkscreen printed and painted silk. And for those of you not familiar with paper making, this is a short video of cotton fibers from a recycled bed sheet that are being pulped in a Hollander beater. And you can see two different stages of the beating. So on the left, you can see the small cut squares of recycled cotton paper circling in the water. And on the right, you can see an example of further into the pulping process. When the cotton is pulped, it's almost pulped enough for sheet making, sheet forming. And a Hollander beater is a machine that uses the pressure of a mechanical wheel grinding on a steel bed plate below to beat, or really it's parsing all the individual fibers apart from each other while the fiber is submerged in water. And has anyone ever heard the term rag paper? Maybe you've used it in your printmaking or your drawing class. Today's rag paper is often made from cotton fabrics pulped in a very similar way. And from some of the earliest days of paper making, all the way back to its origins in China, papers have been made with textile rags, which were used and really used until they couldn't even be used as rags anymore. And once they stopped functioning as rags, they were sold to the paper mills to create paper from the waste. I started taking printmaking classes in New York in 2017, and right away, I started saving all my paper offcuts. Those of you printmakers in the room, I'm sure, have stacks and stacks of paper or putting them in the recycling. But in grad school in Iowa, recycling my own and my peers' cotton printmaking paper offcuts was a primary research interest of mine. From there, I started helping bed sheets and misprints, and prints that didn't work. At the same time, I was collaging with similar materials. And my textile works as well are primarily made using thrifted fabrics or textile industry waste. Papermaking, collage, and quilting all historically imagine new uses for discarded materials. In all of these mediums, I can reuse materials almost indefinitely. This work is titled Woven Screen Holding On. The main structure of the work, the area that's maroon, is a dye printed and painted canvas that I cut and then wove strips of my own handmade paper into, and also woodblock prints that I printed on fabric. And after living in Brooklyn for nearly a decade, I moved back to the Midwest for grad school, and it started to really unearth connections between my younger self and my current self. And collaging and sewing my printed and painted fabrics really started reminding me of the quilts I grew up around. One hung above my bed as a child. My mom decorated all of our homes with quilts, and quilts still hang in their house today. And some of my earliest memories of learning was learning how to cross stitch. From what I remember, I learned how to sew before I learned how to write. And stitching by hand or machine is a way of joining objects together. It's strong, it's usually reversible. You can almost always change your mind. Stitches tenderly hold two objects together, and the tension should be snug, but not too tight. Working with textiles became a way to connect back to my childhood in the Midwest, and really an intimate connection to home. Quilts were the first artworks that I knew, and the artwork I grew up around and grew up making really started to inform the work I was making in grad school, and also continuing to make now. This work is called Dappled. It's a monoprint with oil, acrylic, fiber reactive dyes, and bleach, as well as sewing, hand and machine sewing on textile industry waste, silk, and cotton fabrics. Prior to grad school, from about 2015 to 2021, I was working almost exclusively with color and shape in my work, creating imagined lighting scenarios and painted paper collages, using color relationships to create space and dimension within the work, and often looking at how the light was coming in through the windowsill in my apartment, or how the outside was coming in. And learning how to make lithographs and etchings in grad school, I started bringing line and drawing back into the work. And gridded lines for me really became like a starting point back into that, and something to play off of. Grids connect the medium mediums that I use: printmaking press beds, silkscreen mesh, the weave of the textiles themselves, and paper-making molds. The grids in my work often reference textiles, window screens, my interest in depicting light through color, and forms resembling windows. My MFA thesis and exhibition were both titled Windows and Connected Abstraction, Emotional Connection to Place, personal moments as well with material processes in printmaking, papermaking, and sewing. Windows divide and they connect. Depending on the time of day, they let light in or out. Screens let air move freely, and sounds and smells and shadows. This work is titled Screen. It's a multi-layered collage with hand sewn printed silk and oil monotype on Arches 88 paper. So windows and screens are transparent in different ways. The looser the weave of a screen, the easier we can see through it, and the more it lets in. The tighter the screen, the more it keeps out. Our eyes have no trouble focusing on a screen and what is behind it, but cameras often struggle to focus behind the mesh. It feels as though you need to really kind of relax your focus to be able to experience that beyond the grid. While I was in grad school, I was sending a lot of just like casual photographs to my partner who is still living in Brooklyn, updating him on small moments in my day. And this photo is through my front door, my screen door from Iowa here. And it would often take me a couple tries of like being frustrated, trying to take a picture through the screen and then eventually opening the door to get a clear image. And looking through the mesh really started bringing up questions of transparency and opacity for me. And thinking about the instability of perception. In a photograph, a screen door abstracts the image behind it. It flattens what is beyond to a blurred form of color and light. Abstracted, obscured, simplified, resisting full transparency. And it often seems nearly impossible to get a clear photograph through a screen. The grid of a screen can be fixed or woven like a textile. The screen door where I lived in Iowa definitely had seen better days. After what must have been many people before me renting there, the wire screen was both bent and torn. And the screen door quilt, which is pictured here, became really an exaggerated abstraction of my apartment screen door, an exaggeration of light and color bending around and through the screen wires. I was thinking a lot about transparency and opacity while making this work. Formally, I was thinking a lot about the fabric choices and the inks and dyes I was using and how they might block light or glow from being lit from the back. And for this work, I made a sort of angled installation device to hang it off the wall so that on the right side, it comes off the wall much further. And to the right of this installation photo, there was just like a wall of windows. So at certain times of the day, if the weather was right, the light would come in through those windows and the work would glow and move, or like dappled light would move behind it. And screen door quilt is sewn from painted and printed fiber reactive dyes, acrylic, watercolor, and bleach on hand and machine sewn silk and textile industry waste. For me, the fluid grid of the broken screen door held reference to the slight imperfections of Agnes Martin's hand-drawn graphic lines. There's an example on the left, and Lenore Tawny's break from a traditional grid in weaving, an example of her work on the right. Also, abstract design and quilting, like the quilts created in Pennsylvania by Amish women from the 1880s to 1940s. And a lot of these quilts look so much like color field paintings but they predate people like Rothko and Albers, who are known for that work. An example on the left. And also the abstract designs of the quilters of Gee's Bend. The example on the right is by Loretta Petway. And the quilters of Gee's Bend often repurpose materials like corduroy and twill and clothing in their work as well. The August after grad school, after I graduated, I moved back to Brooklyn and started a 7-month fellowship called the West Bay View Foundation Fellowship at Dudonné Paper Mill. And a big reason why I went to grad school to study printmaking alongside papermaking was because of the collaborative work I saw coming out of Dudonné. And so this fellowship was really a dream come true for me. Dudonné is a collaborative papermaking studio that has a staff of highly skilled papermakers and collaborators that work with artists. Oftentimes the artists have no papermaking experience or very little. And they're working together to make work that neither the papermaker or the artist could have made on their own. And during the fellowship, I worked really closely with Dudonné's papermakers on artist projects for 3 days out of the week. And then I was able to use the professional papermaking studios on the weekends as well to work on my own work. And these are some photos working on collaborative projects with other artists. And the fellowship was really an incredible opportunity to learn and to learn through doing, working side by side with the papermakers and the artists. I have the honor of working on 11 artist projects whose names you can see listed here. And after working on those projects during the week, I was just so excited to get into the studio on the weekend and practice all the new techniques I was learning. And yeah, such a great learning opportunity. And on the left in this picture, you can see us physically manipulating and removing paper pulp from the mold. On the lower right, you can see us using water from hoses to spray paper pulp out of the negative space. It's protected by a stencil. That process is called a blowout. Many of the handmade papers I made at Dudonné were a continuation of ideas from my MFA show and explored screens, grids, windows, and patterning influenced by textiles and quilting. This work is titled Embedded, and it includes cut up and sewn monotype prints that were printed onto my own handmade papers. It's embedded between 2 thin translucent sheets of abaca paper, and the embedded papers were made from a blend of cotton and abaca. The speckled ones are Ozo, again from the University of Iowa. And the embedded prints in here started as monotypes that I found to be unsuccessful in their first iteration. I often keep these unsuccessful works around and keep cutting them up, putting them back together. The works in this piece had been sewn to 10 different things and ripped off of them and sewn back together before I got to Dudonné. And I just love that the history of joining together, excuse me, and being torn apart stays visible and embedded between the sheets of abaca. While I was there, I was often working on both sides of the paper since I was interested in exploring transparency. So this is the front and the back of the same work. And the process I used to make this work is called pulp painting. Pulp paint is really, really finely beaten papermaking fibers that are beaten in the Hollander beater for so long that it almost becomes like a soupy watercolor texture. And the finely pulped paper acts as a binder for pigments. So the pulp paint is also paper. It's not an ink, it's not a paint. It is paper pulp as well. So in this work, I put the pulp paint into squeeze bottles and was painting or drawing with the liquid pulp. And I found that one thing you can do in handmade paper that you can't do in print is build an image without a base sheet. So in print, you're always printing onto something. There's some sort of substrate, whether it be paper or fabric or another object. But in paper, I was really interested in all of the layers of the work being an image layer. So all of the layers acting as like the ink in a print rather than the substrate. So in this work, there is a thin transparent sheet of abaca that's sandwiched between the pulp paintings on the back and the front, but the abaca is working as much as it's like a layer of ink as it is a substrate, and is important for the image. So after pulping your fibers, the paper making process, the next step is usually pulling a sheet of paper on a mold, and a mold is a screen that allows the water to run through and collects the paper making fibers on the surface, which you can see me doing here. So to get the fresh sheet of paper off the mold, you lay it down onto wet felts in a process which is called couching, which means to lay down in French. The work I made at Dieudonné, I was using a lot of mylar stencils to act as resists in the paper making process. Many of the stencils were inspired by textiles, patterns in quilting, or patterns resembling dappled light. I used the stencils as resists to pulp paint through. So on the left, I'm laying down a stencil onto layers of paper pulp below, and on the right, you can see me painting through a stencil, using it as a resist. And then you can also use the mylar stencils to do a process called blowouts. So this is a video here of Amy from Dieudonné helping me blow out the cotton sheet. So there's the stencil is laid over top of a freshly pulled sheet, and then Amy's using, it's called a fog it mister, but it's like a very fine mist that kind of gently pulls the fibers out of the negative space of the stencil. And on the left, you can see Catherine from Dieudonné doing the same thing, but this time with more negative space. This is, I'm removing the stencils from the shaped pulp below using water in a turkey baster to use the stencils away from the fibers. And lining up the mold with the paper pulp below before I laid the paper down or cooched the layer of paper onto the layers below. And this is a work that is complete, but it hasn't yet been pressed and dried. And I like to include this photo because in the wet stage of paper making, everything feels very sculptural before it's pressed. Carving away paper pulp through using water through the blowout process, or physically carving away pulp using a tweezers or a straight edge feels very physical, and I think some of that physicality can be overlooked once it's pressed and dried, but it's very present in the making of the work. This is titled Meadow Constellation 1, and it's actually one of the first works I made at Dieudonné. The image on the right is the back of the work, and on the left is the front. It was made from back to front, starting with the blue cotton blowout on the right. The technique using the hose to blow fibers away. The second layer is a sheet of milky translucent abaca. And then on the front, there's various layers of pulp painting using linen fibers and abaca fibers, using linen through the same stencil I used for the back. And the asterisk pattern on this work I drew by hand and then cut using a machine to help me cut it. And I was excited that the stencil could be used both as a positive and a negative in the image using different techniques and giving very different results. So this is you see here the stencil laid on top of the fibers, and then just a short stop motion of kind of the process. And I used the same stencil and kind of layered it on the felts, and then covering it with the various different layers of abacus sheet and then pulp painting. And those works I cut up and reassembled and machine sewed into a quilt. After the first couple months of my fellowship, I learned I'd have an opportunity to show work that I had made at Dudonné at the Elizabeth Foundation for the Arts. And I had been wanting to make a large quilted work to interact with light, kind of similar to my work from grad school. And the EFA show had this big window, so it was the perfect opportunity for me to realize it. And this work is called Meadow Constellation Quilt. It's one of the largest works I made during the fellowship, and the work references 2 moments of awe that I experienced while I was in Iowa. One was viewing the northern lights with some friends over the Iowa River. The other was learning about a native species prairie called the Ashton Prairie Living Laboratory, which was planted by university faculty and students to help intercept nitrogen pollution and also stop erosion from going into the Iowa River. And this quilt for me was really influenced by moments of awe and crossing the river every day. I had to cross the river twice a day to get to my studio on foot. But then also inspired by the reality of the river carrying nitrogen pollution from all the runoff in Iowa, all the way through the Mississippi River and into the Gulf of Mexico, and creating a large dead zone. So this work was really a way for me to kind of sit with and grapple with the multidimensionality of the river and my experience with it, and kind of experiencing conflicting emotions, about what's moving through the river, but also alongside the emotions of hope and awe that I was feeling. So similar to my screen door quilt, Meadow Constellation Quilt is intended to be installed in front of natural light to illuminate the different layers. So the work really changes from day to night as the light from the window is changing, and it creates a time-based experience, changing throughout the installation period depending on the weather and the time of day. And the quilt is made from the same stencil as the earlier work, and to me the asterisk came to represent both the wildflowers that were in the prairie, as well as the stars during the northern lights, and kind of the hope and awe I felt with both of those places. And the quilt is made from multi-layered sheets of handmade paper that were cut and machined, sewn into these pinwheel quilt blocks. And this work is actually on view not too far from here at Appalachian State University. There's a group show called Sculpting with Paper, Hand Paper Making at Dudonné, and that's on view until June 6th, if you happen to be over that way. So I finished my fellowship at Dudonné in March of 2025 and went on to a residency at the Peninsula School of Art in Door County, Wisconsin. I continued to explore similar ideas to Dudonné, but this time I was making large-scale printed textiles and cutting and sewing them into quilts. So these are a few views of the studio at Penn Art, and for those of you graduating this year, they're accepting applications right now. So take a look at that. And this is the first work I completed at Penn Art. It's titled Northern Lights. Much like my Meadow Constellation quilt, Northern Lights is influenced by viewing the Northern Lights with friends shortly before I moved back to Brooklyn. And it uses the same hand-drawn asterisk pattern, but this time through a silk screen. And it also includes another pattern dyed fabric that is sewn into North Star quilt blocks. And because this work is also two-sided, I needed to find a solution for how it would be displayed to allow both sides to be seen. And from Pen Art, I went to another residency at Goggleworks in Reading, Pennsylvania, and continue to work on the quilts there, but also I was able to take a class in wood turning on a lathe and learn how to make my own installation devices for these. So for Northern Lights, I wood turned the two end caps on the dowel that it hangs from. And this is an installation view of our final exhibition at Goggleworks. Northern Lights is on the right, and another large-scale printed quilt is on the left, and that is called Small Hours, Dusk and Moonlight. Small Hours is also two-sided, and the front references the light at dusk when the stars begin showing in the sky. The dusk side includes a painted fiber reactive dye, that's the maroon, and it's on a blue textile industry waste that was cotton. And also appliqued to the surface with hand stitching is an addition of etchings. So they're dry point and aquatint etchings on handmade paper. And the moonlight side references full moon nights where the sky never turns totally black, so it stays kind of that beautiful deep navy blue. I screen printed the pattern using a product called decolorant, which is similar to bleach, but doesn't affect the fibers as much. And then machine sewed the textiles into a patchwork quilt and finished with hand stitching. And I also wood turned the installation device out of cherry wood for this work as well. On the left, you can see me in the shop, in the wood shop. I had to turn it in two pieces and join them because it's so big. And at Goggleworks, I was also asked to participate in their first annual Print Fest, which was a huge success, and they're going to carry on doing it next year, or this year as well. And as part of the celebration, a number of artists were invited to carve really large-scale woodblock prints. And they were printed outdoors using a steam roller, which you can see here. And I carved a pattern inspired by morning glory flowers, and also printed the blocks. They had a really large etching press, so I was able to print them after as well. The morning glories reference flowers that grow in this 2 foot by 4 foot, really small garden patch in front of my apartment in Brooklyn. The flowers return year after year in the spring, and they open morning after morning in this very unlikely garden in front of my house. You know, kind of no matter what's happening around them, they're always coming back. And I drew the morning glories pattern in the last days of 2024 when I was feeling very overwhelmed with fear and uncertainty about the year ahead. The morning glory flowers became a symbol for me for grit and hope and determination, and they reminded me of the cyclical nature of life and the importance of showing up for what you believe in whatever way you can, even in and especially in difficult times. This is a close-up of the printed quilt on the left, and a studio shot on the right of my corner of our shared studio at Goggleworks. You can see the wood blocks rusting below the work. I also printed a large repeat pattern with them while I was at Goggleworks on the etching press. And this is a work in progress that I'm currently working on. This is the state it's currently in. I covered it with a layer of translucent red silk and am currently hand quilting it. The silk interacts with the colors below, and the colors kind of shift as you walk around it. And And then most recently, in January of this year, I did a residency at Penland in North Carolina, and over the course of 2 weeks, I taught myself a new to me technique, which was using linoleum blocks, which are traditionally used for relief printing, but using them instead as sort of like a low relief mold for couching paper onto. So on the left, you can see a linoleum block as I was carving it, and on the right is a studio shot of my blocks lined up and ready for paper making. Here you can see a fresh sheet of handmade paper. The sheet that was pulled is the pink color, and then I pulp painted on top of it with the copper pulp paint. And this fresh sheet of paper was then cooched onto the linoleum blocks to make the embossed work. And today at 4:15, I'll be showing a demo of this process. If you're interested, please come. And these are a few of the final works that I made at Penland. They're pretty difficult to photograph, so I also brought a few with me that I'll have available to see at the demo as well. And the carved linoleum blocks one of them references the meadow constellation quilt pattern, the asterisks, as well as grids and quilted patterns and textiles. And I combine them with images of morning glories and other further abstractions in pulp paint inspired by textiles and dappled light. And these works also kind of change as you walk around them. You notice different levels of information. The pulp paint is very evident when you're far away, and then the embossment becomes kind of locks it when you become closer. And these, again, are made with primarily recycled materials. I pulped bed sheets and misprints, tore off margins, and handmade paper that couldn't be used otherwise. And in a lot of the works, you can really see the history of the materials. There's like little flecks of ink from misprints throughout the work. And I find collage and abstraction and working with recycled and repurposed materials in paper and textiles to be hopeful. They're acts of cultivating awe in my work and in my life. Abstraction can be a way to see the world differently and imagine new ways forward, to avoid being stuck in one perspective and continually reimagine yourself and your worldview. For me, they're sources of joy and awe and a way to deeply experience and process the world around me. Ways to move forward in a time of our shared history that can often feel hopeless. And yeah, thank you all so much for being here and taking time out of your day to learn a little bit about me and my work. If you'd like to see more of it, I'm active on Instagram, which you can see here, Lauren.Krukowski. Also come by at 4:15 if you're available. And yeah, I'll happy to answer any questions with any time that's left.
Questions for Lauren? And do you want to turn the lights
Sure.
on so maybe we can see?